So, welcome everyone. Welcome to a new episode of our fabulous Business Launch Cafe. And as every week, we have an amazing entrepreneur, an amazing lady with us today. Today, we have with us Bernadette Jiwa. Bernadette, it's wonderful to have you today. So let me do a little bit of an introduction to who Bernadette is. Bernadette, you are one of the worldwide leading business authors and brand story strategists. And you really work with entrepreneurs, passionate companies, and visionary business leaders, really helping them to bring meaning into their brand so that they can actually become much more than just a replaceable commodity, right? And you help them really to stand out in today's noisy, crowded marketplace by really honing their position and showing them how to communicate their difference through their brand story. And we all know the power of brand story. Every time we go into a supermarket, what brands we grab? The ones we have heard of, the ones we are aware of, the ones we love, right? Where we have a personal connection with. And that's what you do. You help, these experts and entrepreneurs to bring meaning into their brand, right? So you also create unforgettable brand names, product names, and also book titles, right? And you have written, and I read quite a few of your amazing books, like the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make Your Idea Matter. And I've already, had a look into your latest and greatest book, Meaningful, the story of ideas that fly, right? And your blog was voted Best Australian Business Blog 2012. You developed a marketing model, the fortune cookie principle, and you spoke about this and the secret of spreading ideas at TEDx Perth. And what I also find amazing that you've worked with the world's greatest marketer and best-selling author Seth Godin on a big book that was one of the rewards in his Kickstarter campaign, right? So Bernadette, after this long and great introduction, it's really wonderful to have you on today. Everyone wants to know a little more about who you are. So what would Bernadette Jiwa say? Who is Bernadette Jiwa?
That's the longest introduction I've ever had. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'll try and be succinct and say that what I do and who I am is a champion of businesses that want to become meaningful brands. So that's what I do every day, and it's a privilege to be able to do it.
Great. And, you are one of the leading experts of creating impactful brand strategies. So, I always wonder, what are the first questions that people need to ask themselves when they want to define their own brand strategy?
Probably the last questions that they normally ask themselves. And the first question is, who is it for? And why will they care about this? And generally, we start backwards. We start with our story. So that's why I wrote my latest book. That's the whole reason I wrote it, because people were starting in the wrong place, and I wanted to give them a framework to begin starting in the right place.
Right. And do you want to, in this book, you're, meaningful, the story of ideas that fly. What an amazing title already in itself. You share this very powerful story strategy blueprint. Would you mind giving us an insight into this blueprint?
This is the original one that's also published in the book. You'll see just a slight bit more detail on this one, but people can use this one too. And so normally when we start with a pitch or with our brand story, we start with our story. And what I was finding was, when I worked with entrepreneurs and I worked with brands, is that a lot of the time people were starting there and they were forgetting to understand who the story was for. So when you start with your story and you don't start with the customer's story, you actually start talking about yourself and you don't have a lot of empathy. So I created this blueprint. It starts with her story, her life, her story. I'll just go through it quickly. Her problems. From her problems, you find an insight, and then you look for the opportunity there. This also helps you to develop products. So then you head up into the product section, you develop your solution. This is also a place where people sometimes get stuck. They talk about rational benefits a lot, and we might speak about that later. Then you've got emotional benefits, problem solved, and then the perception change. And that's the perception in the customer and also the perception the perception of the brand themselves about who they are. So yeah, it's an interesting model.
Great, Bernadette. That was a wonderful overview. Would you mind giving us a concrete example, something that maybe you worked on with a specific client, on what kind of stories were used and these kind of things?
Yeah, what's interesting about this blueprint is I developed it when I was working with the director of innovation for football at Adidas. He was working there at the time, and he cared so much about the players and his team that he wanted to give them some kind of concrete blueprint so that they could reference every single time they decided to create a product, so a pair of football boots. So this is why I created this blueprint in the first place. But to give you a concrete example, something from the book, a case study that I explored there, one of the products, a pretty simple idea. And I don't know if this is something you've got in Europe and where some of the people who are listening have in their countries, and it wasn't something we had here in Australia. The florist industry here is quite big. So if you want to send a bunch of flowers, a bouquet of flowers to somebody, it's expensive. And you don't do it very often. You do it for special occasions. And there were a couple of business partners who came up with the idea of taking all the bigness out of the florist industry, because they recognized that people wanted to send something as a gesture and not just this giant bouquet once or twice a year. So they set up this company called Little Flowers, and they send one bouquet, just one type of flowers. It's quite a small, tiny, neat little bouquet, and they charge one price, and they go to the market every day, get the freshest flowers, and they just create this one bouquet, and they sell that until they're out of that. And it's doing really well for them. They're the fastest growing florist in Australia. So that's one of the case studies, and people don't have to buy the book to have a look at those case studies. They can find them on meaningfulbook.com. They can download this blueprint, and they can read some of the case studies there.
Wonderful. And it looks like the blueprint is not so much only to craft your brand story, but it really even is a way to create new business ideas and build new businesses around them, is it not? Right.
Yeah, because what was happening with my clients, I noticed, was they would, and you might notice this with some of the entrepreneurs you connect with, they would come with their idea, which they thought, this is amazing, why aren't people adopting it? And it's because they started with the idea and not with who it was for. So then they had to find some way to add a layer of marketing on top of the innovation of the idea. And I like to think of this blueprint as a way to help people to bake the marketing into their idea, because they understand who it's for already before they begin.
Very true. And Bernadette, you say also, whoever tells the best story wins. And I know, working with entrepreneurs that pitch in front of investors, the best pitch wins, right? So from your perspective, you're an expert in that. What would you say makes a great story impactful?
This is an unusual one, because you could go on Google and you could ask Google to give you some articles about what makes a great pitch. And I think sometimes what those articles and what we forget about when we're pitching to VCs, which I think is a question you're asking, is to stand in the shoes of the VC or the person you're speaking to. Again, you could use this story strategy blueprint for that. Get to know the person you're pitching to. What do they care about? What kind of details do they look for in an investment? So let me give you an example of, this wasn't a pitch. Well, it wasn't an official pitch something happened a couple of weeks ago. I was at a breakfast meeting, and there was an amazing brand ambassador there from one of the most famous brands in the world, really high profile guy. And he gave us an amazing talk. And at the end of the talk, a couple of people gathered around and shook his hand and said, thank you very much for coming. He came from Europe. Thank you for coming all this way to Melbourne to speak to us. And then one guy came up and just blocked him into a corner and started telling him about his product and how he wanted to partner with his business. And the the poor guy who was being pitched to was stuck in a corner, sort of looking over his shoulder at the other people trying to acknowledge them. And the message wasn't getting through because the person who was pitching, first of all, timing was out and didn't understand the context and the story of the person he was pitching to. So I would say empathy for the person who's hearing the story is your first thing to think about.
Yes, and that brings us. I mean, I'm also hearing pitches and stories again and again, and sometimes I listen even for 15 minutes, and I still don't know what the business is about, right? So why is it so difficult, do you think, for many business owners to even articulate their own brand story?
I think we get stuck in the features and benefits and the facts. We're trying to justify why this thing needs to exist, so we have to talk about all the details. And because we're so focused on the details of our own thing, because we made it, so we're trying to communicate as much detail as we can, and we forget the simple feeling part of it. So an example of that, I think the best one in the whole wide world is the Apple example of the iPod. When Apple launched the iPod, everybody was, well, not everybody, there were companies that were selling MP3 players. And Apple could have launched the iPod and said, this is a 32 megabyte MP3 player. But they didn't. What they said was it was 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that just explains it beautifully. You don't need to say more than that in just a few words. So I would say one of the traps we fall into is too much detail, facts, features, and benefits, and almost feeling like we need to justify the existence of the thing.
Right. And I also love what you're saying, caring is a competitive advantage, right? How can caring really help us make our ideas fly?
I think when we really care about the people that we're serving, it changes our posture. So at the moment, I'm creating a product and I've got a team around me. I'm creating an online course, and sometimes they're having a hard time with the level of detail I want to go into in just respecting the audience, because I don't like to think of people as being on my list. I think we tend to make people anonymous. So we think about people as visitors. We think about them as targets and users, instead of thinking about them as one person at a time coming to your website, coming through the door of your business. Somebody just like you or your mom or your dad with a problem that they might need to help to solve. And we forget about that. I think marketing and business language sort of dehumanizes the work that we do, and that's the piece that we need to add back in.
Right, and as there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are starting out watching us today as well, let's go back to the fabulous or challenging mystery of pitching again.
Yeah.
What would you say is the first and most overlooked rule of pitching in a successful way?
Am I going to sound like a broken record if I say start with the story of the person who's listening? It's the thing we forget every time. If I could drum that into people, they would, if I could do it, I would. And that's what I spend a lot of my time helping people to do, is to actually see their customers so that they can they almost need to be a mirror for their customer and show their customers how their life is going to be different when with their product in it, and they can communicate that to a VC, an investor. The other thing is, I think, proof of concept. So it's all very well saying this is my great idea. If you go to an investor and you say, this is my great idea, this is who it's for, and actually I've got 100 of those people or 10 of those people or 5 of those people who've paid me money for this thing, then you're on your way.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Bernadette. You've given us already so many hints and suggestions of how to create our own powerful brand story. But let's summarize our conversation. What would you say are the key success principles when we want to craft this powerful, impactful story to make our brand really stand out?
Don't get stuck in the features and benefits of what you're doing. Think about rational benefits. Of course, the things got to work, and people expect that. But think about the emotions and how you can inject some meaning into it. Because to borrow, I know people who are listening will probably have heard the Simon Sinek line: "People don't buy what you do; they buy why you do it." I like to take that one step further and say people don't buy what you do. They sense why you do it, but they buy how it makes them feel. And I think if we sit with ourselves and examine why we bought the iPod, or we bought the phone, or we buy that particular brand of chocolate, it's because of how it makes us feel. So start there.
Great, wonderful. Thanks for sharing all these hints and suggestions and insights. And Bernadette, a lot of people that have been watching us today, they'd love to connect with you and learn more about how they can craft their powerful brand story. Where can they find more information about you?
They can follow me on Twitter. It's Bernadette Jiwa. And my blog and my website is thestoryoftelling.com.
Great, wonderful. Thank you very much for being with us here and making the time. I know you're usually busy, and we can't wait to, get your next book into our hands already. Although the last one, Meaningful, is already just come out. I know that. So thank you very much for being with us today, and I really wish you all the best going forward for the powerful, wonderful work you do. It's so true. We all live through stories. We connect through stories. The power of storytelling is just an incredible one in business and in private life as well. So thank you very much for being with us today. Is there anything that you want to say at the end, just to, round this conversation off?
Yes, there is. Thank you for inviting me, and for the work that you do, and for being so patient about trying to connect with me. And it means a lot, and good luck to everybody who's listening and watching.
Great. Thank you very much for being with us today, Bernadette. It's been amazing. And again, next week, we're going to have another inspiring entrepreneur with us. So look forward to have you all on next week again. Have a wonderful time.